I was wondering, are there any initiatives specifically targeted at markets that have a higher propensity around visitor spend or visitor reliance? Because clearly, places like Hawaii and Las Vegas are taking the brunt of the job losses relative to the rest of the country. And secondly, as you begin to hear rumblings around reemergence, really the talk is around bringing construction and manufacturing back, and likely things like the visitor industry and vacations would be somewhat back-ended.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. First of all, absolutely, there is a lot of talk. I certainly work with my colleagues in Congress who represent tourist-heavy districts such as Las Vegas, such as Florida, many of the primary cities on the mainland, such as San Francisco, Boston. You know where all those tourist areas are. These have been real, incredible issues where the incredible irony of us in Hawaii being at the very top of the state list in terms of containment of the public health side of the COVID-19, where we're ranked number 1 or number 2, depending on the day, in terms of the indicia of the pandemic actually impacting from a public health perspective, but yet at the very bottom from the economic consequence down there with Nevada, as a matter of fact, for obvious reasons. And so, we've accomplished quite a bit in the public health area at the expense of our number 1 economy. We all know that. And I think that there is definitely aid that is targeted to the tourism industry, or can be applied to the tourism industry. Here, the major aid has been, in large part, three areas. Number 1, small business, which I've talked about already, since almost all of our small businesses will have some tie back to the tourism industry in one way, shape, or form. Number 2, one thing I didn't mention was the Main Street program. So in the CARES Act from March 27th, we had somewhere around $500 billion of assistance to non-small businesses. And that is available to many of our tourism companies that don't fit the traditional category of being small businesses. That has not been rolled out yet, and so we do not know exactly what companies will and won't take advantage. I know for a fact that many of the national hotel chains and larger companies that don't meet that small business threshold, including some of ours right here, some names that you would recognize if I mentioned them. They have not had access, but they do have access to the Main Street programs, and so we are trying very hard to get that guidance out there. The third area I would talk about is our airline industry, which is key, of course, not only to our tourism industry, but to all of us here in Hawaii, and that has been probably one of the most impacted in the entire country, including within the travel and tourism industry in general. And there was $61 billion in CARES that was allocated directly to the airlines, and that was from a passenger airline perspective, allocated $25 billion to payroll protection, and then $25 billion to operational protection. And that has actually been pretty much completed. And those airlines, to include, for example, Hawaiian, which I don't know if Peter's on the phone or not, but they applied for and have received the clearance to get that money. I don't know if it's actually been dispersed, but they were very, very close. And that was, I recall that being for our Hawaii carriers at somewhere in the range of $270 million or so. So that is an obvious impact to our tourism industry. But it is true that the tourism industry is particularly impacted, but there is no direct yet pot of money that is allocated specifically to travel and tourism. So that's the effort that we have to pursue, is to focus on all the programs that have a disproportionate impact on travel and tourism if we can get the money over there.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other?
Yep. Speaker, this is James Koshiba.
James.
Thanks so much, Congressman Case. Sort of building off of Peter's question, I'm wondering if looking ahead to CARES 2 and beyond, if there's any discussion about making the duration of various forms of aid dependent on states reaching certain targets. In other words, anticipating that our recovery may be longer than others, take longer than others. that things like the UI Plus Up or PPP or other forms of assistance might be extended for states like Hawaii in terms of duration longer than other states until we reach a certain level of unemployment?
We have actually talked about specific triggers, so to speak. And we have in Congress, a number of us, and I'm one of them, have advocated for trigger mechanisms which will target aid to where it is absolutely needed, when it is needed to go there. I think the fair answer to your question is that thus far we have tended to treat the entire country as we're all in this together, and we've just got to get this funding out as fast as possible. And the more complexities we introduce into the mechanism for getting the money out, the longer it's going to take. And we've seen that already in the PPP program and in some of the UI program, especially for UI for independent contractors and self-employed, where they are eligible, but they can't get their hands on that until somewhere around mid-May for a variety of reasons. So as we phase down into, I guess I would call it a more deliberate, hopefully, consideration of exactly how these policies and funding should be rolled out on the national basis, we would definitely advocate for states like Hawaii, which are going to, and I'm glad you said that because that's the realistic fact, is that it's going to take us longer because of the complexities of tourists traveling in and out and how we handle that particular part of our reopening. We're not going to go back to, it's not like we're in manufacturing where they get, their plants into pretty good shape and then people can start to come back under some kind of a, social distancing regime and testing regime and pretty much go back to say 80% production. I mean, we're just not going to go back to 10 million tourists overnight. And so I understand exactly what you're saying and certainly am carrying that part of the conversation in. I would say also in the same breath that this kind of cuts both ways. Some of the funding that is coming out in the second tranche of the assistance to our healthcare system, that tranche was set up to send that particular amount of money to states particularly hard hit by COVID. And that makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't you want to get federal funding to the states that really, really need it? And so that money is going, the first go around was a straight Medicare provider formula, which, Hawaii was just like the rest of the country for the most part. This one, a disproportionate amount of that money is going to states like New York. And so the observation I've made to my colleagues is, and to the federal administration is, that's fine. We understand that. We all have an obligation, but we will have our needs too. I said that at the time that we didn't know where we were going to be on the curve. I was saying maybe in 3 weeks, we're going to need this money just as much as anybody else. So you've got to plan your formulas to come to us then. But the same comment and concept goes equally to any number of these social safety net funding mechanisms over time. We're going to need it a lot more than the rest of the country.
Thanks so much, Congressman.
Thank you.